So thanks everybody. I see couple familiar faces in the crowd, a lot of new faces. So, um, thanks for having me for today's session. I'm going to introduce myself a bit, but spend the majority of today's conversation talking about the work of the Community Development Department at Los Alamos County. I'll give an overview of some of the things we do, and also take an opportunity to highlight some of the sort of key work efforts we have underway in the department. So moving into the presentation, a little bit about me. You see Eli Isaacson there. You can call me Elias, but it reminds me of when I was in trouble as a kid. That's the name my mom used to call me whenever I did something wrong. But a little bit of background on me. I grew up in central Illinois in a town, Champaign, Illinois. It's where the University of Illinois is. But my folks moved to northern New Mexico in 1998 when I was a freshman at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My father got a job at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and so that was sort of my introduction to northern New Mexico, was sort of following my family out here. And it's just over time has kind of become home. My wife, Jessie, she's born and raised in Santa Fe. My mother still lives in Santa Fe. Her folks live in Santa Fe. And so that's part of the reason why we're back. We have a 3-year-old son, and we really wanted him to have a relationship with his grandparents. And so we decided it was time for us to move back to New Mexico. Prior to being in New Mexico, my wife and I, for about 5 years, lived in Santa Barbara, California, where I was the community development director for the city of Santa Barbara. And then prior to that, we were living in Santa Fe. I was the planning and land use director for the city of Santa Fe for several years. And prior to that, had a number of jobs working with the City of Española. I'm a licensed architect. I worked in private practice for many years and sort of worked as an architect prior to becoming working in local government and planning and land use and development. So that's a quick little bit about me. I studied planning and real estate development at the University of Pennsylvania. I did my master's in architecture at UNM, and I'm currently in a executive management program at MIT Sloan School of Business, studying strategy and innovation, and hope to have that program done here in the next 12 months or so. And then I currently sit on a couple of boards, 2 which are of interest probably to this group. I sit on the Santa Fe Housing Trust Board. That's a group that does affordable housing development in northern New Mexico, primarily around city of Santa Fe. They are the group that manages our home loan assistance and home rehab assistance programs up here in the county. I'm happy to talk a little bit about those programs more if folks have questions, but those are geared towards lower income individuals either looking to purchase a home or fix up a home they already own. And so the Housing Trust oversees both of those programs for us in coordination with Dan Osborne, our housing manager. And so we get a board seat as part of that, and so I sit on their board. I'm also on their development committee. And then I also sit on the board of the North Central New Mexico Economic Development Division, NCNMEDD, which is a bit of a mouthful. But that is our council of governments for this region. It covers a pretty diverse geographic area. It extends all the way from Santa Fe County all the way up to Colfax County and Raton. And so there's a lot of there's a range of issues facing those different communities. Housing tends to be one of the common threads in a lot of our conversations, but they also do a lot of really wonderful work in senior services and providing housing and services to many of the sort of rural senior populations in the area and do really cool stuff. So happy to talk about that more as well. Don't have any slides about either of those groups, but if you have any questions, happy to talk about them. So what we will cover today in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about what community development does, why the department is structured the way it's structured, really thinking about how land use, building, and economic vitality all connect and relate to one another. talking about where we're spending a lot of our time as a department, some of our current priorities, things we're working on. Talk a little bit about how folks like yourselves can engage with the department, whether you are interested in some of the policy work we're doing or need to apply for a permit to do some work on your home. And then lastly, just sort of some conclude with some discussion of what we are sort of what's coming, what are some of the projects on the in the near future that we'll be pivoting towards, over later this year and into next year. Any questions so far? We can keep this conversational. We can keep questions to the end, whichever folks prefer. So community development brings together sort of 6 core functions listed here. All of them sort of play a role in how the county grows, builds, and does business. And so one of our primary functions is planning. So community development, our planning team does both current and long-range planning. So current planning is things like reviewing site plan amendments, variance requests, things like that. And then long-range planning is sort of our forward-looking policy work that we do. And one of the big long-range planning efforts we're currently working on is an update to our comprehensive plan. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but if anyone has questions about that, happy to take those. Then we have our building safety division. That includes permitting and inspections. So as many of you know, certain work at your home, or if you're a business and own commercial property, that work requires a building permit. And then after you receive your permit, you're asked to call in a series of inspections along the way during construction so that we can ensure that the construction that's happening meets our codes and is sort of aligned with what was permitted. So that's our building safety division. We have a code compliance team. In theory, currently we don't have anyone staffed in that role. We had a series of retirements at the end of last year, and we've had some difficulties filling that. We have a recruitment that closes July 6th, if you know anybody who may be interested in doing code compliance work for the county. But those folks are really, their main responsibility is ensuring that properties are kept to a certain standard in the community, property maintenance things, making sure that there's not, sort of debris collected on a property that might attract rodents, which then attracts, say, snakes and things like that. So that's a really important sort of function in the department. And then obviously something that's very top of mind in this community is economic development. So we just recently hired a new economic development administrator. We're super excited. It's a gentleman named Max Kudiakov. He's coming to the county from the town of Red River, where he was for I want to say around 8 years, and held a few roles with that jurisdiction. But we're really excited to have him on board. And this is the group that does things like LEED, MRA, which we can talk about both of those more here in a second, but also all of our direct business outreach and any other sort of business promotion activities done by the county. We recently launched a business directory for the county, for businesses, nonprofits, as well as events. And this group, our economic development team, was really instrumental in getting that launched and available to folks. And then housing, this is another one of our real key focus areas. Housing is a sort of primary priority focus of our county council. And so Dan Osborne, who I believe has presented to this group at least once or twice before, is our housing and special projects manager. He does a fantastic job managing our housing projects. I'll highlight a couple key projects we're working on a little later in the presentation, and obviously open to any questions you may have around our housing efforts. And then lastly, tourism is based in the community development department. That's really, a lot of those efforts are led by Ellen Felton. She does a wonderful job. We recently brought on a new destination management contractor who's doing a wonderful job, really sort of really trying to identify some niche attractions here in the county, really developing a new sort of marketing strategy around those strategies. And really our goal in sort of the near term is really trying to pivot away from, or I shouldn't say pivot away from, excuse me, more build upon what we have now, which is a lot of day trip visitors, and really trying to transition more to like weekend stays and things like that. Some of the things we're doing to sort of kind of create more attraction for folks to visit our area is really looking at expanding our outdoor recreation offerings. And that's sort of a combined effort with my department, community development, as well as Corey Styron. I'm not sure if he's presented to this group, but he's our community services director. He does a wonderful job with that department. And so one of the collaborations we're working on with that group is actually bringing a mountain bike race to the county in September as part of a 3-day race series called the Trans Rocky Race Series. And they'll be doing a day at Glorieta Camps, if you're familiar with that facility, kind of near Pecos, a day in and around Santa Fe, kind of a Windsor Trail, things like that, and then a day up here in Los Alamos. And we'll have 2 tracks. We'll have a 20-mile loop for professionals and about a 12-mile loop for amateurs. And it'll be a full day of mountain bike racing here in Los Alamos, and we're super excited about that. Primarily it'll be up here in Townsite. I don't believe we'll be down in White Rock much that day, but really excited about the opportunity to sort of bring more of those types of events to the county in the future and really expand our tourism offerings into an area more sort of outdoor recreation focused. Any questions before I move on? So again, going kind of into some of our divisions and their core responsibilities. So we have planning, and planning really is the foundation of how land is used, how it's developed, and how it's protected around the county. And so our team, it's a team of 3. Danielle Valdez is our planning manager. She's relatively new to the county. I believe she started a little bit before I did. I've been at the county now a little over a year. I started in May of 25. I believe Danielle started earlier, like in March of 25. And then Desiree Lujan and a recent addition to the team, Kristen Clem. The 3 of them, they're responsible for administering our development code, which is Chapter 16. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That's where we set our zoning regulations, our land use codes, as well as our design standards. Typical current planning type applications we encounter, things like subdivision plats, site plans, and rezoning requests. This team also staffs our Planning and Zoning Commission. They meet the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of the month, where we hear things like site plan amendments, variance requests, things like that. They also lead our long-range planning efforts, and I mentioned that a second ago. Right now, we are working on updating the 2016 comprehensive plan. We actually had an open house last night, and we have another one happening right now as we speak down in White Rock, reviewing some potential development scenarios to be further developed through the comprehensive plan. And this is where it sets our long-term land use policies. And a lot of the work that we do at Planning Commission as well as County Council really relies on the policies that are established through the comprehensive plan when we're making decisions around land use proposals. And then lastly, we coordinate on environmental and stormwater requirements. That's a big one. We want to make sure that stormwater is being treated on site, not taking any sort of pollutants and things like that into our natural environments. And we work on that closely with our public works team. And we're in the process of putting out a low impact design manual. And we hope to have that out here later this year. We're working on that really closely with our public works and civil engineering team, as well as our sustainability manager, Angelica Goulet, who I believe has also presented to this group at least once recently. So moving on to our building safety and code compliance functions. So building safety, we use the IBC, which is the International Building Code. We use the IRC, which is the International Residential Code. Those are sort of 2 of the main codes that govern our permitting review at the county. We also look at the International Energy Conservation Code and some others, fire and things like that, when we're reviewing permit applications. Again, this team also is responsible for inspection. So as you're building in the field, We periodically come out. You get a list of inspections associated with your permit. When you reach that stage of your project, you call us, we come out, we take a look and say, yes, this looks good, and then you move on. So our field inspections are run out of this team. We are also required to adopt new versions of the codes. So a new version of the code comes out every 3 years, and we really are we take our lead from the state. So the state has to adopt the code first, and then we adopt it here locally. But that process allows us to make some local amendments, and so oftentimes communities will adopt additional portions of the code called appendices to increase certain things that they consider to be important. So one of the things that we'll be looking at next code cycle is adopting things like requiring new buildings to be EV ready, or new buildings to be to be designed to be all electric or something like that. So these are things that we haven't adopted in the past, but are available to us through the appendices in the building codes to adopt and implement here locally. And then when a project's complete, this doesn't really apply to residential remodels and things like that, but new residential construction and commercial construction, when you're done with your project, you get what's called a certificate of occupancy, and that means the building's safe and everybody can move in. And so we issue those out of this team. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we also have our code compliance function in community development, and that's really complaint-based right now, as we're sort of minimally staffed. But as we sort of get complaints about either activities or conditions in our community that are deemed to be non-compliant or unsafe, this is the team that goes out there, investigates, and works with property owners to make sure they get into compliance. One of the areas where we're working closely with our fire department is on the recently adopted WUI code. So I believe it was last year around this time, the county adopted the Wildland Urban Interface Code, WUI for short, which is really about trying to protect our neighborhoods that are located on the fringe of, in the interface of our wildlands, our national forests, and our community, to make sure that they're doing things that are safe. So removing vegetation for a certain distance from the home, not stacking piles of wood, things of that nature. So we work really closely with our fire department to make sure folks that are in these high interface areas are maintaining safe conditions on their property. The entire county is categorized as a high fire area, but we're particularly concerned about these interface areas where things that happen in our national forest may sort of enter into the built urban area of our community. And then with the goal of, it's not meant to be punitive. What it's really meant to be is a way to work together to ensure that our neighborhoods are safe, and that we're maintaining a high quality of life consistently and fairly throughout the county. Any questions? And so then, lastly, we've talked about these three a bit. Economic development, that's really about, there's an acronym BRE, so business attraction, business retention, and business expansion. So that's, what we're trying to do there is attract new businesses to the county, retain the businesses we already have, and that the businesses that are successful in our community, helping them expand when they need to. We partner with a couple local regional development organizations. So here in Los Alamos County, we have LACDC, which is the Los Alamos Commerce and Development Corporation. We work closely with those folks. More regionally, we have the RDC, the Regional Development Corporation, that is funded largely by LANL, but does a lot of work in the communities of northern New Mexico and sort of the three-county area of Santa Fe, Rio Arriba, and Los Alamos counties. And then we also work, as I mentioned earlier, myself, I sit on the board of the North Central New Mexico Economic Development Department, and I'm also on that board are two of our county council members, Councilmember Herman and Councilmember Hand are also on that board with me as well. And so we work on a lot of regional initiatives through our participation and cooperation with those groups. And then we are, constantly looking at, working with those groups and others around things like workforce development, UNMLA, others, really looking at how do we sort of build workforce that's really geared towards the type of work that's happening in our community, whether it be at Landl or with our other small businesses. Housing, this is a real area of focus for us. As many of you know, housing is really sort of undergirds so many things we're trying to do in our community. So it's hard to have economic development if you don't have folks that can afford to live and work in your community. A lot of the amenities that we hear from folks that would like to see expanded or enhanced in the community, things like retail and restaurants and things like that, really rely on a population size of a certain level to attract new and national retailers and even like regional franchises to locate up here. And so, in this, one of the things where we've been successful recently is using a solicitation process to find housing partners that are willing to develop housing in our communities. And I'll talk about Coyote Mesa, which is on DP Road here in a bit. But another example would be 20th Street, at the end of 20th Street, where we have put county-owned land out for solicitation, got a housing partner in who's working with us to deliver either market rate or affordable housing in the community. That's been a really successful approach that we've been using over the last few years, and we intend to continue with that approach, putting out some additional parcels for solicitation later this year. And we can talk more about that in a second. And then, we sort of track the housing and the workforce needs, and really sort of trying to reduce the amount of commuting that's happening into our community, trying to keep as many folks as we can here. Folks tend to spend more of their paycheck where they live than where they work, and so we see that as a really important piece of the economic development puzzle, is getting more residents here in the county. And then the last one is tourism. I spoke about this a second ago. I don't need to go into too much detail, but we see tourism as also as a very important economic development opportunity for the county. And as we can get more people, leveraging our proximity to 2 national parks, as well as all the history here in town around the Manhattan Project, we really, want to try to leverage those assets as best we can to get more people visiting and spending money here in our community. And so we have a team of folks. Yes? We do. I don't have that in this presentation. One of the things that I appreciate you bringing that up, though, because one of the things, and I'll shoot some links out to Ed or Carol Ann, whoever's the appropriate person, for folks that are interested. But we have been really focused, working actually closely with Jennifer's husband. We've been really focused on creating a data dashboard for the county. And one of the things that metrics we're now sharing on the county website as of just very recently is a lot of information around not only just visitation, but the dollars that those visitors are spending and things like that. And so that is now available to folks on our website, and it's being updated monthly. And so the information is pretty current. So. Presenting it in the sort of dashboard format is fairly new, but we've been collecting the data for quite a while. The data is, there's been some things that have happened recently that have sort of made the data skewed the data a little bit. One of them was COVID. Another one was the Oppenheimer movie. And so there's been some things that have have skewed some of the trend lines a little bit, but what we're seeing just kind of generally is a return to those higher levels of visitation to the county. So we're actually, yeah, exactly. Oppenheimer 2. So yeah, any other questions before I move on? So how do I want to answer this? We would like to, and where there's opportunities to, we are willing to. It's not always easy to foster some of those partnerships, but we don't want to do things that are unnecessarily duplicative, right? And And if there's someone in the community, private sector, who's doing something well and would benefit from our support, we'd be happy to support them. But oftentimes, I think it's been the experience of the county where the county's really been the one who sort of steps up and takes these things on. And so it's always a sort of a balancing act of where is it, where do we do things and where should we allow others to do things. But I think in the area of outdoor recreation, I know there's a group in town that's really trying to promote hiking and things like that and use of our trails. And I think, we're really focused at the county. It's not my team per se, but our community services team as well as our public works team are really looking at providing robust infrastructure, whether it be trail connectivity or, the urban trail, things like that, to really can kind of wayfinding, all of those types of things that can really enhance those opportunities in the community. One of the projects I mentioned a second ago, 20th Street, it's the project that's sort of south of Trinity at the end of 20th Street there. One of the things we're really excited about with that project is it will allow us to connect that last piece of the Canyon Rim Trail, which would then connect 20th Street through 20th Street. We're doing an enhanced signal and crosswalk there. And so it kind of connects the Canyon Rim Trail to Ashley Pond. And so we're looking at sort of connecting all of these missing teeth along the way of some of our trail networks whenever we can, either through easements or other arrangements. So we're trying to build out the infrastructure. If there's other folks in the community that are focused on promoting that and trying to sort of build more of an attraction around those amenities, like, we're all for it. But it's always sort of, not everyone's always willing to want to work with us, and so we have to sort of, that's a case-by-case thing. So, yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question. So, we have our activity guides and our adventure guide, right? And so we are also doing a lot of promotion. We have a really nice arrangement with New Mexico True through their marketing cooperative, where for every dollar we put up, they put up $2, and we get to leverage their marketing network into sort of, markets like Denver and Dallas and Phoenix and even as far away as Chicago. I think they're sort of breaking into that market as well. A lot of it's dependent on where there are flights, like, directly out of the region. So as Santa Fe sort of expands its lift, we'll see New Mexico True sort of expanding into additional markets to really attract visitors. So we have those capabilities and access to those programs. Maybe, the average business person can't tap into those same resources that we have. And so that's where I think we play a really important role in sort of marketing Los Alamos in the context of the region. And then I think we have other folks that are working maybe on a sort of different scale, really promoting activities to both our local community as well as people that are maybe a little bit closer in. And so I think that's an opportunity for us to sort of collaborate in a way that maybe isn't a direct collaboration, but that the fact that we're sort of each spending efforts, sort of reaching out to different user groups, has the sort of additive benefit of bringing more people to our community. So I think that's an example, but that's an example that doesn't really rely on direct coordination. It's more of an example of two different entities doing different things with the same goal in mind, reaching different potential users. And I think, that also can be a really effective strategy. So, any other questions? Oh, yep. So that's a great question, a great comment, and it's something that we hear. We hear that often, and I think it's sort of, I think the way you address that is by sort of, this sort of putting the pieces together. And so as we are looking at bringing additional hotel rooms online in the community, creating more of a tourist attraction, maybe getting more people in the community, maybe that flips the switch to where restaurant owners and other sort of retailers see more value in being open more. And so we don't have a full span of control over all of these pieces. And so what we're really doing is focusing on the pieces we do have control over, where we can contribute to improving the overall, attraction of Los Alamos to potential visitors. And so that's where we're working, and we're kind of trying to, all of us, do our part to sort of build up a stronger sort of, more tourism infrastructure in the community, piece by piece. And it's not going to happen overnight. It is sort of a work in progress, but we're really focused on some of those pieces at the county.
So my comment or question is regarding housing. I benefited from a housing program that was in 2004, Pinon Trails down in White Rock, and you're new here, so you probably...
No, I'm familiar.
So that program was really successful, and on my street alone, there are still, I think, 5 of the original workforce housing owners that still live there 22 years later.
Yeah.
Is there anything like, and the county was somewhat involved in that, I think. I know it was school transfer, land and all that, but it was a hugely successful program in many ways. The housing crash happened in 2008, which affected it then too, but is there anything like that happening in?
So can I revisit that question here in a moment?
I thought you might address it.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about some of our sort of highlight, one of our big housing projects, but also talk about some of the other housing stuff that's in the pipeline, and we can talk about that specific question in the context of those slides. Any other questions before I move on? No. Okay, thank you. So again, how does this all come together? A lot of these projects start in our planning division with that team. As you go through, you get your site plan approved by planning and zoning. You bring that approval to our building permit team. They review your drawings, your plans, and we say, all right, you're good to go. Here's your permit, start building. Again, as I mentioned, we inspect that construction along the way. And then when the project's done, here we are, we have a new project, whether it's residential, units, commercial space, what have you, that really provides that sort of economic impact in our community. And this is sort of showing it as a linear process, but really in reality, these conversations are happening throughout, right? And so you may actually start by talking with our economic development team about what are the opportunities here in Los Alamos. Tell me more about Los Alamos County. What's going on up here? And through those conversations, you may decide, hey, I want to move forward with this commercial project. And so, but we're all constantly working together to really sort of deliver on the council's strategic priorities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well at the end. So some of the areas where we're focused right now, I mentioned housing affordability. We're looking at affordable housing projects. So the county worked with a property owner to purchase deed restrictions. So as you were asking, like what's the county doing to ensure that there's affordable housing in the community? One of the ways we're doing it is through the purchase of what are called deed restrictions, which basically says for a period of time, these units can only be rented to people at a certain income level. And so that's one of the things we're doing. We did that at the 9th Street Apartments. Those are the ones kind of on Iris and Myrtle, in that really close to the municipal building, just north of the municipal building. But we're also looking at Coyote Mesa, which I'll talk about in a little more detail here in a second. You may know it as parcel A8A. That's on DP Road. It's quite a mouthful. That is a parcel that was transferred to the county from DOE in the early 2000s. That's been out on DP Road for a while. And we have entered into a development agreement with a very sophisticated developer called Servitas, who has a really interesting development model that makes housing very affordable. And that project is about 380 units, multiple housing types, everything from apartments to townhomes to sort of flats. And we working with receiving grants from the state as well as working with our development partner, the county being able to offer up land as part of the deal. Of the 380 units, we are getting, I believe, 240 of those units deed restricted forever to people making 120% of the area median income or below. And of those 240, 40 of those units will be set aside for folks making 60% or less of our area median income. So there's some deep affordability in that project. So one of the ways that we are doing, sort of ensuring that we have housing that's affordable for folks in Los Alamos, is through this thing of buying the deed restrictions. And basically it says, we've paid you money to ensure that these units are affordable forever. And so it's a really nice way to get new housing stock in the market while also ensuring that people can afford to live there. We're doing a lot with LEED and MRA. So for those of you who don't know, community development, we live in a world of acronyms. If any of you are former lab employees, you know what it's like. But LEED is our Local Economic Development Act. That is a state statute that we have a local program that travels under the state laws. And that allows us to provide funding and incentives to projects that provide a local economic impact. And we have a couple projects that are actually coming forward to our county council in the next couple weeks. Next week, actually, Phil is involved with the project at the old CB Fox building, bringing forward redeveloping that building to include some retail space, some restaurant space, as well as some boutique hotel space. We're super excited about that. That project will, if county council approves, will receive LEED support. Another project that we're looking at is down in White Rock at the old sort of pizza / McDonald's building. We have a developer down there who's looking at bringing in sort of a multi-tenant mixed use concept, including sort of like bar plus food trucks plus some billiards, laundromat, frozen yogurt. Really cool idea, really creating this really active, vital space right in the heart of White Rock. We think it's going to be super successful. And so that project is also looking to garner some LEED support from our county council. Yes?
So I was wondering how many LEED projects have been approved in the last 5 years?
I don't.
We've been talking about them for many years.
Sure.
But it just seems like there's nothing that's come through in the last 5 years.
So I don't think that's actually true. So I know for sure one. Yeah, retail. So that's a little different, but just in LEED in general, and it's good to keep in mind, like, what is LEED really? What was LEED designed to do in a community? And LEED was really it's been around for quite a while. It's a state level program through their economic development department, and LEED is really meant to attract sort of new industry to New Mexico. So things like Intel, things like pretty large scale industrial and manufacturing operations, really meant to attract new businesses to New Mexico. And so where we've been really successful in using LEED recently, and I think it's within the last 5 years, I think we've supported a local company, a super interesting company, Ubiquity. They've recently received a $800,000 LEED loan from the county to acquire an additional facility to expand their operations up here in Los Alamos. Prior to this LEED agreement, they did another LEED agreement. Now, I can't say for certain, Mara, if it was within the last 5 years or not. So I want to be careful about that. But they have received a previous LEED agreement from the county. And they're really sort of in that sweet spot of what LEED was designed to do, which is around, industrial and manufacturing processes. And they do super cool stuff. They're at Eastgate Road, and they create, and I'm way out of my depth, but they use quantum dot technology that they developed, and they apply it in a lot of films, and they use those films then for things like putting it on solar panels or putting it on greenhouses, which then allows them to manipulate the spectrum of light that's getting through to really maximize that for whatever the application is. So if it's for growing things, they sort of focus that spectrum into things that plants really benefit from the most, or if it's for solar panels, where the PV really benefits from the most. So really cool that one of their big contracts is with First Solar. If anybody knows about First Solar, they're just like a leading edge solar company here based out of the United States. And then they also have some agricultural applications that they're developing. Super cool group. So the county's been really helpful in supporting them. And now we're looking at sort of expanding our application of LEEDA into some other things like this project at CB Fox, a project at the Guest House. If folks are familiar with the Guest House, that is the new hotel that is going up at the old Hilltop House site. And so they've pulled their building permits. I hope they break ground here soon. But that is a project we're supporting with LEEDA and potentially, or I should say, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Susie's in the room, but we will be bringing forward to council for them to decide if the county will ultimately support. And that project is also in our East Downtown Los Alamos MRA district. So they are also interested in pursuing some MRA dollars there as well. The White Rock project I talked about a second ago also is eligible for MRA support, and we're in those conversations there with that project. And so, we're looking at sort of expanding our application of LEEDA, still very much within the confines of the laws, but really looking at supporting more retail-based applications. We also have a LEEDA retail program that we launched in September of last year, where we've had a fair amount of interest from our local business people. However, that's an interesting fit. The LEEDA program, for the folks that are sort of looking for those funds, it's tough to make that one work. We do have a couple that are still interested in still pursuing things, but the majority of those that have expressed interest, I think we've had maybe, 25, just say, give or take, local businesses reach out to us expressing interest and wanting to know more about the LEEDA for Retail program. Of those 25, I would say there's 2 or 3 that are really serious about moving forward with that. And there's lots of reasons why, and they vary a lot from business to business to business. It's hard to generalize. But one of the things that is difficult about that program for small business, especially a small business that may be challenged, is that it requires a lot of security. And so if you wanted a $60,000 loan from the county, or grant, for LEEDA Retail, grant from the county, you would have to have $60,000 in collateral that you could put up and secure that grant for the life of the agreement. And that's where a lot of our local business people are getting tripped up on this LEEDA for Retail program. And that is a requirement of the state LEEDA law, not of the county's LEEDA law. And so we have that's not something that we can change in terms of that requirement. And so that's where a lot of our local LEEDA for Retail businesses are finding that, it's just maybe that's not the right fit for them.
So I guess I have another question. How close are our requirements to other communities in the state that have requirements for collateral? I mean, when you say $60,000, that sounds like a lot of money, but people are paying that for a car.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. So the reason why I used the $60,000 figure is just sort of so our LEEDA for Retail program is really meant to sort of provide grants anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000. So 60 is sort of in the middle there. Now, people who are interested in more, funding than that, can apply to our LEEDA, just our regular LEEDA program. So CB Fox, the Rock in White Rock, the Guest House, they're looking for support at a much higher dollar figure than $60,000, and they're just using our normal LEEDA program. But the requirements, I believe, are pretty darn close to what everybody else is doing. And the reason why I feel comfortable saying that is our local LEEDA program is traveling under the same laws as the state statute. And so while some communities may interpret those laws slightly differently, this requirement for collateral to securitize your grant is very clearly stated in the state LEED statute. And it's our attorney's opinion that there's not a lot of flexibility there. And I believe our LEED retail program is modeled very closely off of Clovis's. They've had some success down there, but their retail program has been geared towards larger big box type retailers. So folks like Marshall's, Ulta Beauty, folks like that, not necessarily local small business retailers. And I think we're finding throughout the state that it's difficult for that smaller local business to be able to take advantage of the LEED retail program as much as we would hope. So, any other questions on any of that?
Is this the time for general questions? I don't want to interrupt your flow.
Maybe let me get through a few more slides.
Okay.
Maybe I answer the general questions. If not, I'd be happy to take as many general questions as we can towards the end.
Okay, we're starting to run out of time.
Oh,
just
we
a
are.
little bit. So
Okay, let me keep
Just so you
moving.
know.
Let me run through this. So we've talked a little bit about LEED and MRA. Another important thing we're working on is updating Chapter 16. Chapter 16 is our land development code here in the county. It was updated in, I'd say, like 2003, 2004 timeframe. As is normal, oftentimes when you do a major code overhaul, you use it for a while, you figure out there's some deficiencies there. So what we're going through is now going back and addressing some of those gaps. And we're kind of taking it in three pieces. The code is divided into 6 articles. We did articles 3 and 6 shortly after I got here. We're bringing forward articles 1 and 5 to our Planning and Zoning Commission next Wednesday. Those will eventually get to council for adoption. And then we'll do the last 2 articles 2 and 4. Those are really about our development standards. We'll be revising those after the comp plans is adopted to really implement any land use policy changes or dimensional standards, things like that change through that process. I just mentioned we're updating the comprehensive plan. It was last done in 2016. We hope to have this done by the end of the year. And then we're also working on a very fun project. We're creating a historic asset master plan here in the county for our historic assets, things like the Baker House, other things like that, making sure we have condition assessments, making sure we're doing the necessary maintenance on those buildings, and then thinking about potential programming opportunities to get more activity in these resources. And so that's something we're working on, and we also hope to have that done by the end of this year. So I talked a little bit about Coyote Mesa. I won't belabor this, but you can see on the sort of left-hand side of the slide why housing is so important to our county. I touched on some of that. There's some of the project stats I mentioned earlier, the 380 units, the 218 restricted at 120 of our area median income or less, and then the 40 restricted at that 60 or below level, which is deep affordability. And then beyond that project, we have the 20th Street project, what I mentioned, which is 240 market rate units. We also have a project that should be breaking ground here very soon. You may see them clearing and grubbing the site over on San I, Arbolada, which is 114 market rate single family rentals, which is very cool. We don't see a lot of that, so it's a townhome product that is for rent. We think that'll be very appealing to folks here in the county. And then as part of that project, there'll also be 23 single-family homes for sale as part of that project. And then we're working closely with LAPS, Los Alamos Public Schools, looking at doing a housing and infrastructure study on that portion, that property actually just north of Arbolada on North Mesa, as a potential site for affordable housing there, whether it's for school staff or others in the community. But that has the potential to bring quite a few, hundreds of units online, depending on the direction we ultimately want to go. We've done a lot of study in terms of what would have to be done to upsize our key infrastructure in that area to support these additional housing units. It's a lot less than we initially had thought, and so we are really excited and are in conversation with the school and curious to see how they would ultimately like to proceed with that. While I'm here talking about housing, I just want to put in a pitch. Next Tuesday, the 23rd, Dan Osborne, who I mentioned earlier, will be giving a very comprehensive update to County Council at the work session in White Rock about the status of all these various housing projects. So I encourage you guys to attend, watch online, and if not, follow, check it out. The videos of those meetings are also available after the meeting on the county website, so you can check that out there. Phil. Yes, CB Fox will be that on the 23rd, and there's one, and the agenda goes out later today. We'll know if the Rock project in White Rock is also on that agenda. We're hoping to get that one on that agenda as well. So big meeting on Tuesday night. So here's some ways that folks in the community can engage with the department. I won't belabor this. We've talked about a lot of this stuff. Here is some info on why the public participation process is so important. One of the big things here is about transparency, as well as really allowing residents to play an active role in defining the future character of the community. And then I mentioned earlier, a lot of the work that we do is really geared towards responding to the strategic priorities of the county council. The work we do in community development really touches on 4 of the 5 big ones. One of them is quality governance, another being operational excellence, economic vitality. Obviously, that's housing and business and things like that, tourism, and then quality of life. And that's where, we work closely with our sustainability manager on, making sure that there's sustainability stuff, implemented through the land use code, and really sort of making sure that future development fits, the natural character and landscape of Los Alamos County. So what's ahead? I'll run through this quickly. I do want to leave time for questions. We hope to wrap up the comprehensive plan by the end of the year, and that'll then set us on our way to sort of finish our Chapter 16 revisions. Continued focus on our local business community, either utilizing some of the economic development incentives and programs I've talked about or others. We did, as I mentioned, bring on a new economic development administrator in the department. Super excited to have him on board, and that'll really supercharge some of the efforts we're making there. Additional land solicitation. So 20th Street, Coyote Mesa, those are projects that came forward by putting out, similar to kind of like an RFP type process. It's less formal, but similar process. That's how those projects really got going. And so we have 2 other county parcels we're interested in moving forward this year. One of them is on the corner of 35th and Trinity, kind of by the Hill Apartments up towards Trinity Drive. There's a parcel of county-owned land there, as well as 1000 Sombrio. There may be some opportunities for additional housing development at that site. And then we're working with our operational team. We have an admin function that I didn't really talk about, but working with that team, we're looking at bringing on some new technologies and expanded customer services. So that's something we're always looking at doing, sort of continual process improvements around that stuff. So thank you. It's a lot of information. I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. Happy to answer any questions. I believe we had one here first.
So thank you very much. I have a question about the power that you have and that the county has to make developers build or perform the way they promised. And specifically, I'm curious about the development on North Road. I think it's called Rutherford. It's behind that little strip mall there where Beef and Leaf is and Film Festival. What is going on with what is basically an empty lot where 3 buildings were built, I believe, and then it wasn't ever finished?
Are you referring to the sort of architecturally interesting condos?
Exactly.
So that's a good question. So as something is being built, we make sure it's being built to plan. So that's sort of one way that we ensure what is being developed matches what was approved by the county. Now, in terms of enforcing timelines and things of that nature, that's where we get, things get a little bit more difficult. Especially when it's a project that has no county participation, right? And so some of the projects I talked about earlier, Coyote Mesa, 20th Street, those projects have development agreements, and within those development agreements are performance requirements. So you get so long to do due diligence if you haven't moved, and then you have to close on the property. If you don't close on the property in a certain amount of time, the agreement goes away, we can put it out to another person, those types of things. So there is some performance benchmarks in those agreements. When a project like the one you're referring to that's purely a private project that has permits and things like that, as long as they are meeting the requirements of the building code in terms of calling inspections in a timely manner and keeping their permits active, we have very little influence over how fast they can move on some of those. And my understanding on those projects, I think it's hit a bit of a stumbling block because of financing and things like that. Oftentimes when you see a project sort of stall out, whether it's after it started or before it started, it usually has to do something with the financing, whether the rate environment has changed or something like that. But it's usually, the approvals piece is actually some of the easier parts of these projects. It's getting the financing and taking on the risk and doing and performing the work. That's usually the more challenging piece of these projects. And so you usually see things kind of stall out somewhere in that phase of a project.
I actually have another question.
Sure.
I don't want to hog the mic, but this is a completely different topic. I believe the Health Council got permission to move forward by the County Council to search out a building or a location for a social services hub. That was at least 8 months ago. I'm just wondering if you could tell us about the progress for that project.
Sure. So I'm not directly involved in that, although I have more recently started to participate in some of this exact phase of sort of doing the site evaluation process. And I know our public works team has a contractor on board to start looking at several sites within the county that would be a suitable home to our action hub. It's got an acronym that I'm not totally to have at my fingertips, but so that is moving forward. I don't know off the top of my head the timeline of sort of coming up with the ultimate sort of site that we think is best suited for that facility, but that is something that is moving forward.
So it looks like there's a lot of planning going on with the county. There's a lot of different projects. And I'm wondering what the ultimate goal is that the county has in mind for the future population of Los Alamos County. What are you aiming for?
That's a great question. So the way that a lot of our plans are written, I don't believe they are sort of necessarily reaching for a specific target population. However, I will say that when you start looking at our affordable housing plan that identifies 2,400 additional housing units being needed in the county to really start addressing our affordability challenges, when you look at our downtown plans for both downtown Los Alamos and downtown White Rock that start to contemplate 8-story buildings, 80 feet in height, 85 feet in height, I believe. So you do get a sense that there is a need, or at least a desire, for additional residents in our community. One of the interesting numbers that comes up in our conversations on the economic development side of things is this number of 25,000. And 25,000 is a critical number that folks that are maybe outside the community that are thinking about locating a new business or developing a new property inside the county, whether it be for a restaurant or retailer or something like that, a services provider, they look at that number as being as sort of a threshold number of whether or not they will locate in a community. And so that is a really critical number. And I think if you look at some of our growth plans as they're currently adopted, I think we would get at least to that 25,000 person population. if not a little bit higher. But no, I think that would be around 25% higher. Back of the napkin, we're around 20,000 between both between White Rock and Los Alamos, and so another 5 would be about 20. Is that 25% maybe? Don't make me do math on the spot. Okay, maybe we are closer to 19. But yes, so, 25, 30% growth. But I think our plans that we have in place show that there is a way to sort of add that additional population in the community in a responsible way. And that some of the challenges that we have as a community around transportation, things like that, may actually be eased if we had more residents residing in the county rather than commuting up here for work.
So do you have any idea how many people are occupying the units at the Hill down there at the old AEC location?
So I just have sort of data on that. I don't have any hard and fast numbers. I do know, we do talk to those folks. Kudos to folks on my team, folks on our public works and public utilities team. We were sort of forced to be very hands-on in helping that group get over the finish line and getting those units ready to be rented. The feedback we got from the ownership group over there was the absorption at first was a little slow, but has picked up considerably. I don't know what percent rented they are, but all buildings have COs. All units are available to be rented, and I think they are adding residents at a pretty good clip. But I can't tell you what the overall vacancy rate is of that project off the top of my head. If you're curious, I think you could probably get, so the leasing team over there is a group called Graystar. They're sort of a national leasing outfit, and they may be able to provide that information. I'm not sure if it's proprietary or what, but I think they are filling up.
And I know time is precious, and I'm going to ask the last question because I have the microphone. So I'm wondering if there are plans, or maybe I missed it, and you've already said it, so let me say that, for things like Oppenheimer apartments by the senior center, because I think there are a number of people who are getting older and would like to not live in this 3,000 square foot house, but there are not very many places that don't have stairs and are nice and don't need to be remodeled. And so I wondered if we have plans to keep some of our older people, of course that's not me, in Los Alamos, in a place like Oppenheimer, which I think there's a lot of rentals there, but not people selling.
No, that's a wonderful question, and it's funny that you asked because we had this conversation several times yesterday as part of our comprehensive planning process. So that is some of the feedback we've been getting from the community is folks that want to stay in Los Alamos. They've lived here 40 plus years, whatever it might be. They love it here. This is where their social network is. They love the lifestyle, but it's just me, and I have the house that we had as a family, and I don't need 4 or 5 bedrooms and all this kind of stuff. So where do I go? And so we're really looking at opportunities here in the county through our comprehensive planning process to bring some different housing products online that would address that sort of population that's looking to downsize but stay in Los Alamos. And we see that as a really critical piece to sort of, our housing market's a little gunked up. And so we see that as a really important piece to sort of free up some existing housing stock to newer residents to the community. And so we're really exploring that. We see that as a really important piece.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it.